Welcome, Internet, to the third weekly TIGRadio show.
Hey, Internet.
Hey, Internet.
We are your hosts, Matthew Wegner, Ben Reese, and Tommy Reffinus. Is that how you actually say your name, Tommy? I've never.
It's Reffinus, but the first part is pronounced Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah, Dr. Reffinus.
I see what you did there. So, since the last show, the IGF main competition finalists have been announced. There's been a tremendous amount of discussion, both positive and negative, about that. So our show today will be IGF themed, with IGF chairman Simon Carless and then IGF finalist Andy Schatz.
Yay!
And Tommy, you are also an IGF finalist, so
yay!
This is true.
We could kind of get you for free.
That's true. I'll just have feuds with every IGF finalist we interview, no matter what category they're in.
You worked on Joe Danger, right?
I did work on Joe Danger and Today I Die.
Nice.
Yes.
That's a lot
Probably
of
the best
versatility.
games.
So before we start the show, we actually have an audio essay for you guys. One of the things I would like to do at TIG Radio is air audio essays from other indie game developers. So if you guys want to email us a 3 to 5 minute maximum audio clip of you editorializing some viewpoint, comment, if you want to say, hey, this is what I hated about the IGF finalists, do an audio essay, give it to us, and we'll air it. You can email those to hello@tigradio.com. And if you want to know what's coming up on the next show, we're not going to actually bother with any kind of website or blog, but you can follow along at facebook.com/tigradio or twitter.com/tigradio. So before we get Simon on here, we have an audio essay from Alexander Bruce, and let me just start to play it.
Hello TIGRadio listeners, my name is Alexander Bruce, aka Demerith, and I created a game called Hazard: The Journey of Life. I entered the main IGF 2010 and I didn't get selected, so I'm going to talk about what that means. I may still be selected for the student IGF, but this essay is a direct response to the IGF main competition. Firstly though, I'll give a quick introduction to my game for those who are unfamiliar with it. Hazard is a game about philosophy set in an abstract world. The player is told nothing, and as they move through the game they make choices, solve puzzles, and encounter a whole lot of unexpected situations, which teach them about the world that they're in, and about life as well. Development started off back in 2006, and I've worked on it entirely by myself through about 18 months of spare time development. It was selected for Sense of Wonder Night 2009, it's a finalist and grand finalist multiple times for Make Something Unreal, and it won Best Unsigned Game at Game Connect Asia Pacific 2009. So, needless to say, things were looking pretty good for the game up until the main IGF, where it wasn't a finalist in anything, but did manage to get an honourable mention for the Nuovo Award for Innovation. So what does this mean? Well, before I get into anything personal, I have to say congratulations to everyone who did get in, and bummer to everyone who didn't. For myself, I have to say that not making the IGF main competition was humbling, and that I'm not angry or disappointed. If anything, this will only help the game in the long term, because it destroys the notion that being successful is easy. Back when I started working on the game, I set out with a goal, to make a game that I would love playing that wasn't the same as anything else. I treated the development of the game as though I had one chance to get everything right, because I would never make a game like it again. I took all feedback seriously and was highly critical of every design decision that I had made. When Sense of Wonder Night came around, I was genuinely determined to make sure that I was selected as a finalist, and put every waking hour of passion and effort into the game that I could. I entered Make Something Unreal around the same time, expecting nothing. After all, I was just some dude who made a game. Being selected for Sense of Wonder Night and Make Something Unreal proved to me that my game was worth something, and talking with like-minded developers at the Tokyo Game Show convinced me that there was no better time to do full-time independent development than now, when I had a game that was almost done and no other real responsibilities in life. After those competitions, I entered the IGF and Game Connect Asia Pacific. For the IGF, I knew I was up against stiff competition, but I felt confident with my submission. For GCAP, I felt really confident with my submission, given that it was already being well received internationally. I ended up winning overall at GCAP, and also spoke at the conference to some excellent reception, which left me walking away feeling pretty great about the game. Leading up to when the IGF results were announced, I completely expected the success to continue, but the game's absence from the finalist list made me take a step back and appreciate everything a little more. With every success that I had with the game, I moved further away from just wanting to make an amazing game, and more towards wanting to win everything, as though if I wasn't selected as a finalist, it would instantly mean that the game had failed and was worth nothing. But that's not what all of this means at all. Not being selected for the main IGF means that I can look at things from a more down-to-earth perspective. My game isn't perfect yet, and this is simply recognition of that. There are many ways in which I aim to make this game more amazing, and I'm happy that this has happened at the competition stage, where I still have plenty of time to fix everything, than at its release, where things matter more. At this stage, I've created a game that has a lot of potential, as demonstrated by the honourable mention for the Nuovo Award, but it's not quite finished yet. So here's my current assessment of what all of this means for the game, and why I have no reason to be disappointed with the main IGF results. Sense of Wonder Night was judged based on the concept of the game alone, as demonstrated by a video and a synopsis. They never played the game, which says that conceptually the game is strong. The feedback from playtesters of the UT3 mod and from Make Something Unreal has been positive, though I feel as though people were more forgiving of the game because it was still in development and was not something that they had paid for. So from these I can say that despite any issues with the game, there's obviously some potential moving forwards. Game Connect Asia Pacific was a chance to demonstrate the game in an exhibition format where random people could come up and playtest the game. Watching people try to play the game was interesting, because there were a whole lot of people who were too scared to even touch the game, leaving me to play it for them. Although it won overall, in part for being different, it didn't quite have the effect on people that I was aiming for, so I walked away with a long list of things that could make the game better. But the main IGF isn't judging the game as a mod, or purely as a concept, or just against more traditional games. The main IGF is judging how well the game works as a complete experience. I know that some people will say that there's some luck involved in being selected, based on who judges your game and what other games they had to judge, and maybe that's all true, but it's too easy to use that as the only reason as to why you didn't make it. There are plenty of games in the IGF that are built to stand out from others, and that's why this is a competition where polish and universal appeal really matter. Maybe a game was good enough in other competitions, but so was everyone else's. Look at anyone's list of IGF picks and they'll all say something different, because there are a significant number of extremely good entries this year, each one standing out for their own reasons. Captain Forever won IGF China and 6Vs was a crowd favourite, yet neither game was selected as a finalist. That doesn't make them any less amazing. Moving on from all of that, Hazard is still being released in 2010, and I now know how much further the game has to go before it's there. I look forward to the feedback that I receive from those who judge the game, and I thank the judges for the honourable mention in the Nuovo category. It's a real vote of confidence for my game. Congratulations again to all of those who were selected as finalists. One way or another, you all deserved it. And who knows, maybe I'll have more luck in the student IGF or the experimental gameplay workshop and still get to meet you guys. As for the main IGF, I look forward to competing again next year with a more complete entry and a more open mind. After all, I'm just some dude who made a game. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for that audio essay.
Very good.
He is on the chat if anybody wants to talk to him during the show. And if you would like to submit your own audio essay, just email us hello@tigradio.com. So let's jump right into the IGF segment with Simon Carless, who is the IGF chairman and a host of other things. Let's quick get him on here. We don't have the capability to stage people like a real radio show.
Nubs.
Hello.
Hey, Simon, what's up?
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Pretty
Hey,
well.
Simon.
So, Simon, give the briefest of introductions about what you do at Think Services Incorporated, or whatever the heck.
Oh boy,
it is.
yes. Actually, I was recently promoted, which I guess is good. So I'm actually the global brand director for the Think Services Game Group nowadays, which means that I oversee everything we do, which is all the game developers conferences, of which there's San Francisco, Austin, Europe, China, and Canada, and I also run GammaSutra.com, which is obviously where I was working, where I first started working at Think Services, and also I'm still publisher of Game Developer Magazine. So apparently I do a few things, but IGF is something that's pretty near and dear to my heart. I didn't originate it, but I've been kind of running it or part running it for most of the last 5 years, which is kind of from when there was some good games before that, but I think around Gish time and onwards was when the IGF really started coming into its own. So I've been around since then.
Yeah, it actually kind of, like, the early days of the IGF actually fascinate me a bit, because the very first IGF was actually my very first GDC when I was 18, and it seemed like the tone of it wasn't all this experimental stuff. The tone of it was more, the game industry thought that, oh, we can no longer make games by just a couple of people because the technology is just too insane. And then the IGF is more like, oh my god, people are actually making, an RTS with 2 people. And it seems like it took a few years.
Yeah, it took a while. I mean, I really applaud it. It was actually a guy called Alex Dunn, who actually still works within my company, and is not that well known at all, unfortunately. But I want to give a big shout out to Alex Dunn, because he was the guy who originally conceptualized the IGF like 11 years ago, and it wasn't particularly it wasn't particularly logical at that point. There wasn't a big indie scene, but I think what really happened over time was it really started getting there, and I think the IGF obviously to some extent has helped it, even if it's all getting quite big at this point and therefore quite controversial.
Yeah. So what's your take on the controversy? I mean, it seems like the controversy last year was really focused around pixel junk.
Actually, Pixel Junk and you have to burn the rope. Were the two that. So the controversy last time was definitely about specific games and their right or not to be in the IGF, and also obviously you have to burn the rope was kind of like how should a game with a gimmick necessarily beat all these ones people have spent a year on, or 5 years on. So yeah, I mean, I think as you guys seen, I've been commenting as Matthew and Stu have been commenting on various threads on the TIG source thread. We keep an eye on it. To anyone who says, the organisers aren't going to make any changes. I think we're all, the point is we're always open to looking at it and making changes. And in fact, a number of the changes we made from last year to this year were as a result of people asking for things such as extra feedback, and that's something we really implemented this year. But I think the jury is out now on whether that was a good idea, because it actually seems to have unearthed a lot more reasons for people to potentially be upset, somewhat paradoxically, because they're trying to provide people value and and takeaway.
Yeah, I actually thought that. What I realized halfway through this massive 25-page TIG source thread is that a lot of people were trying to use their feedback to infer their scores, where I think a lot of judges took feedback as an avenue to suggest improvements, even if the game was really good. So there were some comments like, oh, you were a finalist, that feedback sounds really negative. But really, the scores are the scores and the feedback is the feedback, and the two are actually quite different. So I think a lot of people who weren't finalists looked to their feedback as an indication of why they weren't a finalist. And I think that's not a very good way to do it.
Yeah, and obviously, the entire concept of scoring in some ways is potentially arbitrary. But obviously, we have this massive amount. In the end, the IGF is a paradoxical thing in itself. All games are good to some extent. We have to pick like 7% of a great deal of games, of which far more than 7% are really kick-ass. So that's always going to be controversial. I mean, I think one of the reasons the IGF, I was thinking about it, I took a step back because there are some people clearly who are, I think the people who are most upset about the IGF in general, I mean, obviously it can be obviously divided into several camps. I mean, there's certain people who are upset that certain games didn't get in, but that's I think that's more of a just, well, guess what? Some judges didn't like it. Maybe we need to look at who the judges are. But we do make our try our very hardest to have a representative set of judges. So I think we'll continue to look at that. I'm very happy with all the judges we got, and I think they all voted pretty conscientiously.
Yeah.
But I think another side of it is what are indie games really meant to be? Is it okay for a game that wins the IGF to be just fun? It doesn't, does it have to have a message? Does it have to tell you something? Does it have to be emotive? I think those kind of things are what some of the people are most upset, and they're probably more into the, games should make a difference camp. And I think that's what we've tried to acknowledge this year with the Nuovo Award, which is much more of a, games like how did this game really make a difference and push things forward. And I think, in fact, Alec Kaloka made an interesting comment in the TIG source thread, which was, we've really tried to, give the best of both worlds here. We've got both the games being judged under traditional criteria, such as best design, best audio. I still think that's a completely valid way to judge games, and we also have the Nuovo Award, which is much more of a juried kind of like, what do these 10 people think are the games that really made a difference and pushed things forward. So
yeah, I actually think the way that it works structurally, I mean, if we have 300 entries this year, and if next year is going to be 400 entries, we have to slice up the game somehow. We have to compartmentalize that not all judges see all games. And I think that works really well for the stuff. And I think Nuovo worked really well because it was basically another phase of judging. I don't know if do we talk about the way that the checkbox worked?
Well, yeah, we should talk about it just to make sure everyone knows about this, because at least one person who was vividly complaining then made a comment, could you tell me more about how Nuovo works? So that shows me that not everyone's really understood it. And I think, and it's actually something, I was talking to Matthew briefly on IM before this, it's actually something now we have such a significant amount of judges. It's something that we may consider doing for the entire competition next year, because it did work fairly well, and it's a multi-stage thing. Essentially what happened is all the judges, as well as judging all their games like normally out of 100, had a tick box, and if they felt like a game should be relevant for the Nova Award, they just ticked that tick box. So that meant across all the games that were judged, we had a kind of guide to the greatest hits, which could potentially work for the Nova Award. But when the Nova jury took a look at it, they didn't have to pick the game that was highest on the list. It was just a way for them to not have to play all 300 games to work this out. And I think that's actually something that worked pretty well. I think I don't think the top 5 most recommended games were the Nova winners because it's Nova finalists because it's the opinion of the jury. But the point is, it made it a lot more manageable. And I think making 309 entries more manageable is one of the most difficult things we have to do.
Yeah, I'm actually. What's your take on the growth curve of the IGF? I think last year was 230. So do you think next year will be 380, 400 entries, or do you think it'll slow down?
I don't know. It's a good question. Obviously, this is just I'm still actually dealing with, as are some other people, the student and mobile stuff, and so there's a good other 300 or 400 entries there. So it's not really just 300; it's like 600 and something. Yeah, but I think it'll keep going. There's a lot of people. I mean, it's clear to me. Another reason I've been thinking a lot about why people care so much about the IGF, and it is one of the few awards where you really. You can be a game that no one has really heard of at all, and you can become quite popular suddenly, and you can maybe get publishing deals and have your game on digital distribution a lot easier. And it's purely because of this nomination. It makes all the difference. So at that point, because if you think about other awards, perhaps even like independent film awards and things, there tends to be some buzz beforehand, or even I guess the Oscars if you want to make that comparison. There tends to be some buzz beforehand. There tends to be some kind of conceived wisdom about who might be a finalist, but because a lot of the games are really unknown, a lot of the people discussing them don't have time to play all of them. Some of them may not be publicly available. Yeah, it's a surprise to everybody, and when it's a surprise to everybody, it gets pretty controversial.
Yeah. So, what's your take on the objection that the IGF should be more towards scholarship? The IGF should reward up-and-coming indies that might not succeed without the IGF nomination, versus the IGF should reward all good indie games regardless of, oh, this person's won before, or this person is an experienced developer doing their own thing as an indie.
I think that we're just rewarding the games that are the best, and I think if you look at the range of games that were finalists this year, and I think incidentally, I will stand behind all of our picks this year. I think they're really kick-ass. There's certainly some games that I personally love that aren't finalists, but guess what? I'm not the one who gets to decide. So I think, if you look at the games, then they're really running the gamut from games that have already been released and are well known, tiny games, like Starguard, which is already available for free and is done just by the one guy, all the way up to larger console downloadable or games that are eventually going to be console downloadable. And so I think I don't think it's the part of the organisers or the judges in the IGF to sort of rule on that. I think they just want to look at the product, the games that they're given, and say what really moves me.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this a lot on the sort of after-hours Skype, but I think a lot of what makes the IGF most successful for people that do need that kind of scholarship aspect of it is actually the IGF's prestige. And I think one thing that would actually hurt the IGF's prestige is if it did draw back from being it's the best of all indie games, regardless of who you are. So if it became it's the best of all up-and-coming games, there's some sort of budget cutoff, there's some sort of team size cutoff, I think its prestige would actually be hurt by that. So I think like the best thing that can happen to people that do need more exposure out of the IGF is to have the IGF amazingly kick-ass in terms of quality of entries, and then that will help them more. So I don't know, I think if they're actually like an up-and-coming indie is actually helped more by a larger, more experienced team entering the IGF, and then being a finalist alongside them as opposed to in place of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of this kind of thing, I try and abstract the IGF from the process of having an agenda there. I just try and make sure people can enter games. There's no one who's egregiously incorrect, it's certainly in the organiser's opinion, for entering games. And then people go ahead and say, hey, I really like this game. And I think year on year we see breakout games with just one or two people making them, often winning ahead of games that are made by many more people.
Mm-hmm.
And what else was I going to know? Oh yeah, I just want to make a comment on feedback, because I think I'm quite conflicted on feedback at this point, because definitely there were several complaints, and at least one kind of significant complaint last year, that kind of for the $95 you pay, you're expecting a lot more feedback, and I think we tried to do that this year, and I'm now not so sure that wasn't, a potential misstep, because I think it does really, I think that now I think about it, people are now saying, well, I wouldn't pay $95 for that feedback. Well, that's not really what you're paying the $95 for. It's just an entry fee for the competition. I think that's slightly fallacious, and I think also, as we discussed, I think if we end up getting obviously I stand by the majority of our judges, but certainly there were some judge comments which could have been more helpful this year, and it really I think it really ends up making people who are not so happy about the result really end up fixating on it, and I think that's unfortunate. So maybe in that case, if people are claiming, well, guess what, you can get as good feedback by posting a thread on TIGSource. Well, maybe it's not the place of the IGF to provide feedback. Maybe we've been confused there by what people are saying, and that's not really what we should be doing. We should just be honouring the best game.
Yeah, I actually saw some in the huge TIGSource thread. There was even somebody complaining that the feedback that they had acquired, or somebody else complaining on their behalf, that the feedback was too lengthy. It could kind of cross the line from blasé suggestions into armchair designer was the term they used, and I thought that was funny. That it's like Steve pointed out that we could probably make it rain cookies, and they would complain about the milk. So
well, yeah, it's people are going to bitch no matter what. I mean, if it was $10 to enter the IGF, it would be, I didn't pay $10 for this kind of feedback. If it was free, they would still do it, because people just like to bitch.
Oh yeah, and that's definitely true. But I think as I've seen it discussed somewhere, underneath the bitching, and there is definitely some valid, there's definitely some valid points. So I'm in the process of trying to extract those, and we will, we absolutely will make changes for next year. I mean, I guarantee you there will be at least one change for next year that will be as a result of this discussion. I wish the discussion was a little less frenzied, but at least people care, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always on the side that the opposite of love isn't really hate; it's apathy. Like, if nobody cared enough to do this huge 25-page thread, I think that would mean more trouble for the IGF than if everybody had an idea for it. I think that's much better.
Yeah,
and I do think, and I want to give a shout out. I do think it's bizarre, and I say this as the guy who runs the IGF, that there's not been more discussion of the other indie prizes that are already out there, including Indie Game Challenge, Indiecade, PAX 10. Eurogamer indie stuff, because I think for example, I've seen some people advocating for alternative kind of prize names, like going away from game design and audio and art into more stuff that's a little more kind of abstract and awards kind of more, let's say, feeling based stuff. Well, that's what Indiecade already does, guys. So go and support Indiecade if you like that. I don't want people to be completely fixated on IGF to the exclusion of anything else. I think that's unhealthy for everybody, including my publication.
Yeah, it is funny to me. Well, not funny, but it's true that people really, really love the IGF, and it's a little bit disturbing to me to see people that were kind of banking on becoming a finalist as almost part of their business plan. Like, I'm going to make this game, I'm going to become a finalist, and if that doesn't happen, like, you've totally sunk me. And it's like, well, on a dice roll, you have a 6% chance of becoming a finalist. So it's don't bank on it. I don't know.
Yeah, and I do think that as the amount of finalists gets larger, it is important to be. We were nice and transparent this year, and I think that's good. But honestly, some people use that against us, I think. So I do think there's a case to be made, as some people have been suggesting, to get a little more tiered in the future. So there's really so I am thinking about whether it's a good idea to take the Narovo style approach, which is the main jury recommends stuff, and then a smaller set of people vote on the actual prize. That could be extended across the entire competition. I'm not saying we're going to do that, but I think now that we've proven that we can do that with the Narovo award, that's actually worth considering. And I think that will also get rid of some of the complaints people might have about judges only judging a certain rigid subset of games, to which I would say well, they officially do, but actually, of course, they're interested in the other leading contenders. So probably a lot of people who have 14 games associated with them have downloaded a bunch of the other stuff as well, just to check it out.
Yeah. I know that a lot of people have discussed games on the judge comment section for games that they weren't assigned to.
Yeah, because everyone's interested in certain games, and often those certain games are probably higher quality ones. So that will give you an even better idea of where your entries score overall.
Yeah. So are you thinking of having a jury for each individual award? So there'd be like an audio jury, a technical jury, or just sort of a jury for the major grand prize award?
Oh, I was thinking about a jury for both awards. I mean, obviously this is very early, but I think Nuovo people seemed a lot happier with the fact that, well, firstly there were honourable mentions for Nuovo, which I think is good and something we may extend elsewhere. So you don't receive invitations to the IGF an honourable mention, but it does note those games that were pretty close to being finalists, and I think that's obviously something you can use in your publicity for your game, which we're very happy to help you with. And the other thing I think is having an explanation of why games were finalists also really helps, which is something we can't really do so well. I mean, we can kind of summarise judge comments, but in terms of, I do like the idea that there's a conversation before finalists are picked, and that conversation isn't just not possible between 150 judges and 307 games. So I think that's cool. I would say there is a disadvantage to going, with a smaller amount of jurors, which is the tipping point for a game being a finalist or not, even for something like the Nuovo Award, was pretty small. It's only like one vote at that point between a game being a finalist or not. So it does come down a little bit more towards the individual judges', opinions at that point, but maybe more so even than the way we've got it now. But I would say if we pick the right people, maybe that'll work. I don't know.
Yeah, I think a jury for like technical could work. Technical is more aimed towards objective. It's not meant to be your viewpoint on which game is moving the medium forward like Nuovo is supposed to be, but it's more like this game did something that was technically more difficult than this other game in a very objective measure. And I think what's interesting about the IGF complaints is that some people it seems like the tone of their feedback is that they want us to be more objective, and other people are complaining that we don't have enough of a viewpoint, that there should be more discussion and more consensus and not as much sort of objective measurement.
Yeah, and I think we can also be led astray. I think sentiment is a difficult thing to predict, and I will say that if you look at the mainstream, like anyone past the indie forums reaction to the IGF finalists, it was overwhelmingly positive. And I think it's important to note that. Boing Boing did a post on it that was really well received. Everyone else, all the other major sites that run it, were very happy with it. But I think, now we're getting to the stage where there are so many sub-genres in indie. It's like what happened to independent music. There was a good article, I think, on Crispy Gamer about this a few months ago, about how indie as a term really has ceased to mean anything in the music business. And maybe we're slowly going towards the path where indie will simply be subgenres, and indie will cease to mean what it has done in the game genre. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think those subgenres are well defined or exist just now. But yeah, I think that's an important point.
Yeah, there was a great discussion a while ago in the indie world about the indie terminology not meaning as much as like underground. Like underground is different. You can have sort of underground and surfaced music where an underground artist is not well known. And if you think about the IGF feedback you need to be more scholarship-like, I think they're actually saying that the IGF should only focus on underground game developers and not people that have already surfaced and already have like Kotaku tags and such.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, as I said, I think we just really want to award the stuff that is clearly not mainstream. I mean, if that can even be defined nowadays, but I think it can by the kind of people who enter the IGF, and that's what we're trying to do. And we're not really in this. I think there's been some discussion. We're a for-profit organisation, things services certainly. And I know, probably the reason we do the IGF is that it helps attract people to attend GDC. I'll certainly fess up to that. But personally, I do it because I really care about it. And we definitely spend a lot more money on it than we make. So in a lot of ways, it's a labour of love for us. And since we obviously run a lot of the other big sites, and obviously we run, we We even pay the guys who run it in indiegames.com, obviously, because we care about the area. There's no real concrete takeaway for us on that. I just sneaked it in the budget somewhere. But you know, I think I think that's an important point to make. Because I think I've seen there is still some concern that because we're not a minted non-profit, we're in it for nefarious, yet to be revealed reasons. But I haven't worked those out. So there you go.
So one quick last question for you, straight from the horse's mouth. What is your advice for people that want to enter the IGF? How do you become a finalist, Simon? How? I think one of the most important things by far is what is the first 10 minutes of your game like? And I say that purely because I think that maybe there'll be some claim all the judges aren't paying enough attention if they can't get it within the first like few minutes. But I think that is one of the essences of what makes a popular independent game nowadays. You kind of get it to at least some degree when you start, and I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make. They don't correctly hone. I think there's been some claim, for example, that Osmos really most of what they changed from one year to the next after they were unplaced in the IGF to like multiple nominee in the IGF was they changed the first few minutes of their game. They made it more immediately accessible, and then you can really it steamrollers from there. And I think that's one of the most important things people can do. I also think don't be afraid to explain as much as possible as well. I think the judges are smart people, but they do need to know what's going on. So I think before you submit the game, run it past a bunch of people who aren't people who've worked on the game, and sort of say, do you get this? Do you understand how to play it? Do you get straight into it? I think accessibility is really important. Yeah, actually, there was someone pointed out in one of these feedback threads that, like, wait a minute, so the judges just play games like normal gamers, and I actually found it fascinating that people think that somehow our judges have the ability to scrutinize a game beyond what they're able to scrutinize a game. I kind of brought up the analogy at the office the other day of like a diamond appraiser. Like, you have these diamonds, you think they might be good, but you have no idea of knowing. Like, you cannot tell. So you have to bring them to somebody who has this specialized equipment, and they basically tell you, oh, this diamond is fantastic, it's great quality, this one's not. And I think the IGF judges don't have any kind of like special equipment. People are always so surprised, like, wait a minute, you didn't like put this under your magic game microscope and tell us all this flaws and things that I couldn't see myself. So I think any advice that is just make your game good as if a normal person was playing it will apply really, really well to as if a judge were playing it.
Yeah, and it definitely upsets me. I think some of the games that the indie scene were least happy about not being finalists are games that, I mean, I personally love, like several of them. But if you look at it, then maybe they're not as immediately accessible to even the average game player as the hardcore indie guys. And I think that's potentially at least part of it.
Yep. So thank you for your time. We're going to bring Andy Schatz on, but we will call you back for the end of the show discussion period. We're going to catch a few questions from the chat room.
Real quick, I just wanted to say to Simon, thank you so much for being civil all the time. I can't imagine that that's easy, and it's appreciated.
Well, yeah. I get a lot of practice typing things that I then have to delete, so it's great.
Yeah, I actually think that you deserve a lot more props than you get.
Yeah,
Andy,
absolutely.
Well, yeah, I mean, thanks, I appreciate that. So there you go. I'll keep being civil because I'm British and that's what we do.
Cool. All right, we'll call you back in a bit.
Okay, thanks, guys.
All right, later.
Later, Sam.
Whew, the buzzing is gone. I think I can probably edit that for the podcast version. All right, let's get this. Let's get this shots through my heart on here.
I miss him already.
Shots through my heart. That's pretty good.
Shot through the heart. Hi.
Cool. Andy, welcome to TIGRadio.
Beautiful.
What's going on? How are you guys?
You're just
fantastic,
Carless. So actually, before you even introduce yourself, Andy, I have a clip that I'm going to play for you as soon as I can find it.
Hit that.
I'm trying. God damn
Hit
it.
it.
I'm trying. I don't know where the window is.
Oh no.
A little bit of a fail here. We'll fail.
It's over to the left.
All right, so this is last week after we had the hour-long video show. We stayed on the show after, drunkenly waiting for the IGF announcements. And when we knew who the finalists were, we called a few of them and got them on the chat. And this was Andy's reaction. So here you go.
A bunch of sweaty dudes on the line.
Oh, hey, we're all kind of naked.
Oh, yes. Yes. I can't even talk. I just jizzed on my face.
So that's the clip I have for you. I'll just play that for posterity's sake.
That's awesome. That's actually how I usually answer the phone.
That's your business line. So Andy, give us the briefest of introductions about who you are and why you're on the line.
Sure. My name is Andy Schatz. I made the game Monaco, which was nominated for Excellence in Design and the Grand Prize. If you may know me because I've actually hosted the IGF for 3 years. And the year before that, I was a finalist with Venture Africa, which is an ecosystem building game. So at any rate, that's who I am. Hello, my name's Andy.
Good day. So what fascinates me about Monaco is that Monaco is intended to be a side project? Explain.
Yeah. I started as an indie about 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago now. And I started making these games about building ecosystems. And the first one, Venture Africa, did pretty well. It sold pretty well, and then I hired a guy and basically spent all the money I made from that on that. And the second project was Venture Arctic, and it didn't do very well. It pretty much flopped. And so I was in the poorhouse again. And then I ended up doing some contract work to make some money again, and took a deep breath and decided to make the third game in the series, which was an ecosystem game about dinosaurs.
Oh my god, dinosaurs.
Yay.
Yeah, it was called Venture Dinosauria. And I hired a guy and started spending money like crazy to try and get the thing done. And spent about a year on it, and I just wasn't getting anywhere. It was nice looking, but it just wasn't fun. And I kept going back to the drawing board and restarting and back to the drawing board and trying to get the game design fun, and prototyping this thing over and over and over again, and I just couldn't get it. And it was really the game I really wanted to make, and I really cared about it. So each time I'd go back to the drawing board, I'd take like a week or two off from working on it, start working on another project. And the third time I did this, I started working on this little stealth top-down 2D game in XNA. Just to give myself a breather from Dinosauria, and after about a week, it was already way more fun than any of my other games. So I figured, well, I'll keep working on this. And so another week goes by, and it's even more fun, and another week goes by, and it's even more fun. And after 6 weeks was the IGF entry deadline, so I entered it. So now I've actually been working on it for about 12 work weeks, and yeah, I love it. I mean, it's a lot of fun. I think it's a blast. So whether or not, I don't want to editorialize about whether or not the game deserves to be there. I think it does. I love it. But beyond that, I was totally shocked to be selected as a finalist just because it really wasn't something that I was expecting at all, because it was just, this little thing that I was doing on the side. So totally shocked, totally excited. Yeah, just blown away by being selected.
So when can we expect Venture Dinosauria to be finished?
I don't know. I really do want to come back to it at some point, but it's totally backburnered right now. But I definitely want to. Ooh, that's a hot picture of me.
It's gonna get so good, buddy.
Sweet. Yeah, I don't know. I know you're joking, but I actually do want to come back to it at some point. But I have no idea, because I'm gonna have to start totally from scratch, I think, when I eventually do come back to it.
Yeah, I mean, my only advice there is to add a vehicle and maybe some ragdoll physics.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually think it's a great story that you can go from a side project. 'Cause I think a lot of people start something, and there's so much advice out there. You have to finish what you start. You have to finish what you start. It's really important to do that. And I think that advice is all correct, but at the same time, it's just if opportunity starts knocking like that, like if the side project gets super fun, I think it's great that you had the foresight to be like, hey, wait a minute, maybe I should give this some time.
Right. Well, I mean, I didn't have a whole lot of sort of mental choice about this. If you want to, I was basically getting to the point where I was really wondering whether or not I should be indie at all anymore, and wondering if I had to go get a job and quit the whole thing altogether. And really, I mean, sort of suffering mentally and emotionally at the same time. Like, I just was a complete mess. This is the first time when I started working on this is the first time I felt good at my job in like 2 years. So I didn't have a choice.
Yeah. It's fantastic. So are you going to change up the game at all? Like, are you going to hire a bunch of people again? Because that's like one of the things that you did for all the previous projects was that you said you hired somebody and then spent a lot of money. And that's the one thing that this project hasn't had yet. Are you going to go down that path?
No, I don't think I'll do that. I'm in fact positive I won't do that. The reason I hired people in the past was really two different reasons. One is I'm really social, and I've been doing this sitting alone in my room for 5 years and getting pretty lonely in the meantime. So, to be quite honest, hiring people, half of the reason for doing it was just to have someone around to talk to during the day. The other half is that I was working on 3D games, and I can't do all the 3D stuff. I can't do the 3D art, and with the 2D stuff, I can do a lot of the art myself. So I may hire some contractors to do little bits and pieces, but and certainly the music. I should say that everything that I've put into Monaco so far is totally free or attribution-only assets or the art I made myself. So I haven't spent anything on it.
Nice. What are your plans now for the game? Like, what's the feedback been after you've been announced as a grand prize finalist? Have you been contacted by anybody yet, or press, or what's the reaction been?
I've gotten a couple of press contacts. To be honest, I was so unprepared for this nomination that I didn't have a PR plan. I didn't have anything. I didn't even, I don't know how I'm really supposed to publicize this game because I just hadn't thought about it. And that, combined with the fact that my games in the past have been targeted towards, family audiences, and it's not a mature game, but it's certainly not in the same vein as the stuff I've done before. So yeah, I've been contacted by some press, and I'm kind of trying to put it off a little bit because the game seems to get better every week. It gets significantly better every week. So the longer I can put it off, the better. But at the same time, I'm kind of running up against the deadline of the actual IGF award ceremony, and I want to make sure that I get pull in some press before that, because if the game doesn't win, then I don't want to be lost in the dark.
Well, it's not going to win. So yeah, you should go ahead and think that way.
Is that Tommy?
This is Tommy, yes.
Yeah, well, Tommy, it's okay. I really like Super Meat Boy. I think it's a fantastic game. I actually wrote down a few things I wanted to say to you about Meat Boy, if you don't mind.
Very good, please.
They're actually the 5 nicest things I could think of about Super Meat Boy.
Okay.
Number 1, let's start with number 5. The color red is really nice. I really like the color red. Number 4, Super Meat Boy, it's pretty good for a Super Mario clone, I admit. Number 3 is it's definitely the second best game about a ball of plasma that Tommy's worked on.
Whoa.
And number 2, I swear to God, it definitely deserves to win 5th place in the IGF, which is amazing considering there were 300 entries. Number one is that Super Meat Boy. It's actually a much better title than Edmund's previous title for the game, which was Red Gish.
Red Gish. That sounds kind of good. Actually, I think we might change that. See, I'd love to play Monaco, but I'm not sure I have a machine that that has at least a 486 processor. I don't know if I have the specs for a very, very intense XNA built 2D game. So I'd love to play it. I'm not a rich man.
You could play this on your TI-85, man.
Oh well, again, that's one of those fancy calculators.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
The watch calculator. Anyway,
of Monaco to play and make fun of.
Okay, guys, come on, guys.
Thank you. I don't want to talk to that guy anymore.
Well, Tommy's going to conclude the interview, so it's just Tommy and you from now on. Tommy, you had something you wanted to say to Andy?
I already said pretty much all I wanted to say. The one thing I did get out of how you were explaining how you hired is that you actually have to pay for company. That's the only thing I got from all of that.
Harsh.
Oh, damn.
GDC is going to be great, guys.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be like last year. Andy said he was gonna kick my ass like 8 times last year.
No, I'm going to punch him in the balls again.
Again.
That was a great night.
So, yeah, no, I'm actually looking forward to a three-way brawl between Tommy, Edmund, and I. I'm hoping to end up on top of that three-way.
Hey-oh.
That does sound pretty sexy.
It's the GDC way.
So Andy, I'm actually going to ask you the same question that I asked Simon. So, what's your advice for an IGF entrant? Speaking as like a multi-finalist now,
Sure.
finalist.
Well, and I should also say I actually was a judge last year, and I was worried that being a judge and also having hosted the award ceremony before there's going to be some sort of outcry that it wasn't fair or something. But I really I don't feel like I've had any sort of insight into the IGF that allowed this game to be selected. So I don't have any strong insight. The two games that were selected were totally different from one another. They were both. I guess all I can say is that you need to excel at something, which is probably pretty obvious. You need to have a certain amount of polish. Monaco, while it looks really simple from the screenshot, actually has a fair amount of sort of polish to it. And you probably need to try and hit on all cylinders, too. Even if you are just hoping to be nominated in a single category, the game really needs to be all around good in order for judges to feel positively about it. So yeah, I would say make sure that you don't leave any part of your game out. Monaco wasn't nominated for the audio award, but I actually think the audio may be one of the best things about the game, and I'm positive that it had a very positive influence on the judges. At least from the feedback I got, they all mentioned how good the audio was. It actually surprised me that it was nominated in design and not audio because of that. So yeah, I would just say make sure you hit on all cylinders when you're entering a game. And update frequently. I updated Monaco, I think, every other day or so after the entry deadline. I was using Quick Once deployment, which allows me, which basically does auto update anytime anyone starts the game. So, my assumption was that most judges wouldn't be actually doing any judging until about the last week of judging, which means, they were basically, rather than playing my 6-week build, they were playing my 10 or 11 week build, which I'm sure really helped.
Yeah. Is that insight based on your last year experience of doing last minute judging?
No, I actually was really good as a judge last year. I judged it. Last year you could judge a lot of games, and I think I judged way more than my share, and I did it early too. So, shut your hole. No, actually it is, the judges I do think tend to wait until the end anyways, because they know that the designers are updating their games, and they want to make sure they're judging the newest version if possible. So.
Yeah, I always get that question every year. It's like, hey, can I update my game? We don't really publicize it, but yeah, you can always upload a new bit or whatever to the FAQ, or if you're like a web game, then you can just update whenever.
Right.
I think I have updated like 12 times this year, and it was 14 for Goo, like the year Goo got in. So yeah, updating is good.
No, definitely makes a lot of sense.
Cool. Well, yeah, I think that's good advice. Especially that you need to have some sort of broader appeal. I think there were games this year that were really, really strong on one axis, but really, really weak on other axes, and therefore just did more pro. Like a game that might have had really, really good technical stuff, but just didn't even have a game yet. Just probably was hurt by that.
Right, and I do think that the judges, I don't know, because every judge is just an individual, and yeah, they're given instructions, but every judge can judge how they want. But my guess is, just from human intuition, the judges are going to rate games higher that are fun. And I know that that's not necessarily what all games need to be about, but it's just true. If a game gives a judge the warm and fuzzies, they're more likely to rate it higher in every category. So.
Yeah, I mean, even in to go back to my diamond analogy, the diamonds have all these criteria, but even if it just looks prettier, it's going to influence whether or not they're actually going to buy the diamond or whatever.
Right.
But let's cut over to a concluding segment. We'll just kind of keep you on the line and segue you more gracefully. But thank you for taking time out for TIG Radio.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks,
for having me.
Andy.
Yeah, let me just get Simon back in here. Although Simon buzzes, I guess I could just call his cell phone. No, I've got him in here as this. And then.
And I should say also, I hope you guys don't go to a jury award.
Hold on, Simon's saying wait. Wait. Oh, he's Skype now. Oh God. You mean you actually hope that we don't go to a jury versus like an average score?
A full jury. I don't think the system is bad. I think there's a few corrections that need to be made, but I don't think the system's bad at all.
I think some of the categories would benefit from a jury, though, like technical, for instance, because
the technical one I hate. That's the only category that's stupid.
Yeah, that one just seems kind of sort of random at times. But yeah, I think if there were just a jury for technical. What's that?
It's like trying to judge the engine of a car without being able to open the hood. You know?
Yeah, it's like my mom. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem.
I've opened that hood plenty of times.
Part of the problem of technical is that a lot of it is behind the scenes. Like the fact that the Super Meat Boy engine is portable to so many platforms isn't exposed as a juror who's that kind of sits in the audience. It's like if you're at a theater show and the lighting rig is really crazy, but all you see from the audience is like one spotlight, and you're like, oh, they just have a spotlight up there, and then you realize, oh no, it's actually this.
It's like the Oscar for editing.
Yeah.
You judge what's not there.
Yeah, and like unless you can see like the source footage, you're like, oh, that's what you made out of that source footage. That's crazy. So we have Simon here directly on Skype.
Hey, I think, yeah, it's working.
Oh my God, that's so much better audio quality.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, I should have tried that last time. Oh well.
It would have been a much better 20 minutes. Okay, so yeah, we have like 8 minutes left in the show, and then we'll just cancel the recording and stay on drunken Skype. So there were some questions, or maybe not questions, but statements from the chat room. One was just the IGF sucks, but I think Simon already responded to that.
I think my response was yes.
Yes, of course. So chat room, what do you have for questions? In the meantime, Andy and Simon, you might not have heard that, Simon, because you were transitioning, but Andy thinks that you shouldn't move to a jury. Discuss.
Oh, well, that's interesting. I don't really know at this point. I mean, one of the problems here is sometimes, we're led by the nose, and then we shouldn't be radically changing stuff every year because clearly, I think we have to be careful not to change too much, but I am a little bit, some of the comments about audio I partially agree with. I think it happens in the Oscars and stuff as well. Clearly, when people like a game, they'll rate everything quite highly, as was discussed. So I think maybe having people recommend stuff and then having a jury of people who are looking more specific at the audio stuff might help with that. But I don't know.
My suggestion, I posted a fairly lengthy comment near the end of that TIG source thread, was just, a lot of people have said move to a tiered system, but and I think that's a great idea because I think the problem is score normalization, that you have some judges that when they like something they give it hundreds, and you have other judges when they like something they're a little more nuanced about their numbers, they give it a 93 or something like that. And the judges that give their scores, give hundreds to games they like, end up having more influence. And if the judges are restricted to only a set of 10 games, then the scores just aren't normalized. And so I think the problem is, I think what you need to do is go to a tiered system, so you end up with, so you have more judges in the first round that are judging more games, and you end up with more normalized scores, and then in your finalist round you can go back to the old system, which seems to work pretty well. I mean, every year the best game has been selected. I have no doubt about it.
Yeah, no, I think so as well, and I think it's easier in the final in the final area because everyone just has the same 20 games to check out. But I would say that the thing about Nuovo that was interesting is for the Nuovo Award this year there were no ratings at all. It was just, do you recommend this game or not? And then the jury played through it and then discussed it in email. So that's kind of interesting because you get no issues with normalized scores. There were no scores.
It's interesting, but you're going to end up with I don't want to say corruption, but you're going to end up with games that are favorites of the judges. And no matter what you do, the perception is always going to be that it's a rigged system.
Yeah, it is true. If there are 10 identifiable judges, I've looked into this a lot. With contests in the UK like the Turner Prize or the Booker Prize, if you have, if you have a certain amount of judges for a category, people are going to go, well, X knows Y, and Z only likes procedural animation, and
Imagine if Monaco had been selected as a finalist, given a jury system,
Yeah.
I like that.
So it's difficult. There's pluses and minuses either way. And one of the things I did say in one of my comments was just because people like the Nuovo Award this year and there haven't been any complaints about it, doesn't mean that that's because the system is correct. It just might be that we've managed to hit the ones that don't piss people off. That's completely separate.
Great. I think the best of both worlds thing is great.
I think part of the problem with the finalist list is that there are 20, like this year there were 20 finalists and 300 games, and I don't think there's any 20 games that we could list that wouldn't omit one game somewhere that somebody would fire off a really sort of vitriol-laced rant about.
You could probably omit Super Meat Boy.
Okay, so 19, yeah, sure.
So there's actually a question from the chat that I think is interesting, and host, if you want to throw something in. If we could add a new category to the IGF, what would it be?
I put my response in the chat.
Game by the bitchiest developer. I thought it would be more like the meatiest game or something.
No.
Sponsored by Super Meat Boy.
I think writing gets overlooked. And partly because it tends not to be a very central thing, and it's annoying to play games that have a lot of writing to them, unless you like that sort of thing. But at the same time, I think it's something that doesn't fit into any other category that really deserves some recognition.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because some of the games that I was disappointed that didn't get, like, I tend to find that adventure games don't do too well, which is disappointing, because I guess there was more than one adventure game which I really liked this year. Personally, at least, obviously, you guys know I don't control the votes, but I really like 78641, which is that crazy like Dadaist adventure game, and obviously there were a couple others I really dug as well, and they just don't, because on the current scale of things that we have, they don't really, there isn't really, you wouldn't say an adventure game which is in the normal 2D graphic adventure trope is well designed necessarily. It's a bit of a, so that's a shame. So I think writing would help encompass those, but I agree. The problem is writing is only applicable to a small minority of the entrants.
Right.
Yeah.
It's is Seamus, is that supposed to be like the most fun game, or what exactly is Seamus rewarding? Just like game of like what is that like?
I'm going to go look up our definition of it, because we do have a definition of it.
We basically tell people that we don't actually tell them the definition of overall. We kind of anti-define it as we separate overall score from the other scores, because some games are kind of more than the sum of their parts, or some games are like less than the sum of their parts. So a game might have sort of average scores if you isolate audio, you isolate tech, you isolate anything else, but the overall experience is really positive. So the Seamus finalists are actually the highest overall score from the judges.
Overall, but that doesn't necessarily mean like the game you had the most fun with.
Yeah, it's probably the softest number, I think.
And the definition in the rules, which I guess I wrote at some point, just FYI, is it's open to all entered games. Scores will be based on the overall innovation, quality, impressiveness, and enjoyability of each entered game. So it's just meant to be. It's not meant to be one or the other. It's meant to be a combination of all of them. Whether that's actually possible, I don't know, but that's what it's set up as.
Yeah, I think I'm actually going to poke at the code in a second here, because I'm actually curious if I were to take all the scores from the judges, like all 2,000 of them, whatever, and average their non-overall score, like would it actually match the overall? Like how many judges actually deviated from what would have been an average score? I will look that up. All right, so we have like 2 more minutes on the actual show proper. Somebody asked the question, maybe, or seriously or not, why didn't V get in? I don't know if anyone actually wants to answer that.
It wasn't as good as the finalists. Sorry.
I haven't played it. I want to play it. I haven't played it.
I think I alluded to maybe one of the reasons. I mean, personally, I'm a massive fan of Manic Miner and Jet Set Willy, and for those who know those games, they're European like ZX Spectrum games. They're obviously quite influential on Terry stuff, and so I love that. So I wondered. I sent him a note afterwards, an email, because I was personally, I was disappointed it didn't make it, and I said maybe, it is influenced by a bit of a European sensibility in some cases of some kind of games that maybe maybe your average judge, it doesn't really get the lineage. I also think, there were some comments. Terry himself made a comment that he said a lot of the judges said the game was difficult. So I felt like maybe initial accessibility for the more for the less hardcore player might be an issue. But I'm second guessing. I haven't spoken to any of the judges about why they scored it how they did, and he's got the feedback and has made most of it available. So I guess we can draw our own conclusions.
Yeah, and I actually do want to hammer on the point again that you did send him a note, and there are other games that either I wanted to be a finalist or Steve wanted to be a finalist, and if you actually were to add up all the games that the organizers would want to be finalists, there's already too many. I think people get hung up on the fact that if a game's not a finalist, it must have done terribly, and I think honorable mentions will be one way to kind of get around that in the future.
Yeah.
But I also think it's interesting and instructional to people. It will also be easier, I think, if we do the honourable mentions next year. If you get an honourable mention, you'll know you're almost there. If you didn't get an honourable mention, then you'll know, well, maybe there's something beyond my initial impression of how accessible this game is to our judges, providing you trust us to pick the right judges.
Yeah, I actually think that every game mentioned, all the kind of classic ones, like, hey, why isn't auditorium and audio? Why isn't this and that? I think every game that I've seen in a thread, just off the top of my head, probably would have been an honorable mention if we just did the top 10 scores, top 15 scores.
Yeah, and as someone just said in chat, I shouldn't have to answer that question.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you, Andy and Simon, for coming on the show. This is the end of TIG Radio number 3, a weekly show about independent game developers. Special thanks to our guests Simon Carless and Andy Schatz. Your TIG Radio hosts are Matthew Wegner, Ben Reese, and Tommy Reffinez. TIG Radio theme song by Danny Baranowski. TIG Radio website by Kyle Pulver. TIG Radio is proudly sponsored by Absolutely Nobody, and see you next week.